What is the scariest dream you have ever had? It started with a soft whisper in the dark. I found myself in an old, abandoned house, the kind that felt like it had been untouched for decades. The walls were covered in dust, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. There was no furniture, only remnants of what had once been: a shattered mirror, an overturned chair, a broken clock that had stopped at midnight. As I walked through the house, I heard it again, the whisper. Faint at first, but growing louder, closer, like someone was following me. I turned around, but the house was empty. No one was there. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper grew more urgent, more insistent, until it became a sharp, high-pitched scream. I ran through the house, my heart pounding, desperately searching for an exit. But every door I opened led to another room, identical to the last. No windows, no escape. It was like I was trapped in an endless loop. The whisper turned into a voice, calling my name, echoing off the walls. And then, I saw it. A figure standing at the end of the hallway. Tall, thin, and draped in shadows. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure began to move toward me, slow at first, but then faster and faster, until it was sprinting. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The last thing I remember was the cold touch of its fingers on my shoulder, and then I woke up. But the feeling didn't leave. It still lingers even now as I write this. I've never felt more alone. I was in the middle of nowhere, standing in a vast, empty field. The sky was pitch black, and the air was so still that even my breathing seemed too loud. I couldn't remember how I got there or why I was there in the first place. My feet felt like they were sinking into the ground, as if the earth itself was trying to pull me under. As I looked around, I saw nothing but darkness stretching out into infinity. The only thing that broke the silence was the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and thunderous in my ears. But then I heard something else. It was subtle at first, just a faint rustling behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I kept walking, hoping to find something, anything that could make sense of where I was. The rustling grew louder, closer. It was like something, or someone, was following me just out of sight. I started running, desperate to escape, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, the shadows seemed to stretch further, chasing me, closing in. Finally, I collapsed to the ground, my legs too weak to carry me any further. The rustling stopped. The air grew colder. And then a voice. A low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You're not alone." I turned, but there was nothing. No one. Just the field, the endless void, and the horrible realization that I hadn't been alone at all. I woke up, gasping for breath, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, still hasn't left me. I never believed in spirits until that night. It was a typical evening, the kind where everything felt normal, calm. I went to sleep expecting a peaceful rest. But what I woke up to was anything but normal. I found myself in a place that wasn't my room, yet it looked familiar. It was an old house, one I used to visit as a child. The wallpaper was faded, peeling at the edges, and the air was damp, like it had been sealed off for years. I walked down the hall, unsure of what I was doing there. It felt like I was being pulled, as if something was guiding me. The house seemed alive, creaking and groaning under the weight of time. I could hear whispers, soft but clear, echoing from the walls. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure at the end of the hallway. It was tall, draped in shadow, but there was something strangely familiar about it. My heart began to race and I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure turned its head toward me, and its eyes, they were hollow, black voids. No pupils, just darkness. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grip my wrist. The touch was ice cold, as if it had been dead for years. I tried to pull away, but the grip tightened and the whispers grew louder. The figure began to move toward me, slowly, deliberately, and the air around me grew thick with the smell of decay. I screamed, but no sound came out. And just as the figure reached me, I woke up. My heart was pounding, my body drenched in sweat, but the feeling of that cold hand, it never left. Every night since, I feel like something's watching me, waiting for me to return to that house. It felt too real to be a dream. I was walking through a dense forest, the kind where the trees are so thick they block out the sun. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay, and the silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. I wasn't sure how I had gotten there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting and shifting like they had a life of their own. My steps grew hesitant as I began to hear soft whispers, barely audible at first. I stopped, straining to listen, but the whispers faded the moment I paused. I pressed on, but the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing through the trees. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, as if someone was following me. My heart raced and I dared to look back, but there was nothing there. Just the forest. But the feeling of being hunted didn't go away. In the distance, I saw a clearing bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. Drawn to it, I made my way toward it, my legs moving on their own, as though I wasn't in control anymore. When I entered the clearing, I froze. There, standing in the center, was a figure, tall, cloaked, with a hood obscuring its face. The moment it turned toward me, the whispers became screams, deafening in their intensity. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure reached out toward me, its fingers long and twisted, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones. Just as it touched me, I woke up with a start. The room was dark, but I could still feel the cold on my skin, as if I hadn't truly escaped. Even now, I hear the whispers and sometimes I feel that same cold touch again. I never knew fear like this. It started with a door. A simple wooden door sitting in the middle of an empty room. I had no idea how I ended up there, no memory of entering the room or even what lay beyond the door. There was just that eerie silence, thick and oppressive, surrounding me. Curiosity got the better of me and I reached out to open it. The moment my hand touched the handle, I felt a chill run down my spine. I hesitated, but something urged me forward, compelling me to open the door. I swung it open and what I saw beyond it froze me in place. It was another hallway, but not like anything I had ever seen before. The walls were covered in cracked mirrors, reflecting distorted versions of myself. Versions that didn't look quite right. Their eyes were hollow, their smiles too wide, their movements jerky and unnatural. As I stood there, unable to look away, I realized I was not alone. The mirrors, they were alive. I stepped into the hallway, but as soon as I did, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The mirrors seemed to pulse with some sort of dark energy, and I could hear faint whispers, too soft to understand but loud enough to make my skin crawl. The reflections in the mirrors began to move on their own, mimicking my every gesture, but with a horrifying twist. Their eyes followed me, always watching, always waiting. As I turned to run, one of them stepped out of the mirror, its face twisted into an expression of pure malice. I stumbled back, terrified, but the figure didn't stop. It moved closer and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though it wanted something from me, something I couldn't give. As it reached for me, I screamed and the whole world around me seemed to crumble. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. But every night since, I hear the faint whispers and sometimes I can see the reflection in the mirror, the one that's not quite me. There was a moment when I knew something was terribly wrong. I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark, endless void. The wind howled around me, carrying whispers, soft at first, then growing louder, more urgent. I didn't know how I had gotten there or why I was standing on the edge of a chasm. There was no ground beneath me, no solid earth. Just that vast, unending darkness. I could feel a pull as if the void below me was calling me. The whispers grew louder, now seeming to come from all directions. I wanted to turn back, but my legs refused to move. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape, but my body was frozen, rooted to the spot. The whispers turned into voices, voices I recognized. My family, my friends calling out to me from the darkness, pleading for me to jump. The desperation in their voices was palpable. But something inside me knew that this was wrong. They weren't really there. Then, out of the blackness, a figure emerged. It was tall, looming, and completely featureless. No face, no eyes, just a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. It moved toward me slowly, its presence cold and suffocating. I could feel the darkness closing in, suffocating me with its weight. The figure reached out and I felt a cold hand on my arm pulling me toward the edge. I screamed, but no sound came out. As it dragged me closer to the void, the whispers became deafening, overwhelming. And just before I fell into the darkness, I woke up, sweating, gasping for breath, but still feeling that icy grip on my arm. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something is still waiting for me at the edge of that cliff. Something about that place didn't feel right. I was in a small, dimly lit town, one I didn't recognize, yet it felt strangely familiar. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, with no cars, no people. The buildings looked old, decaying, as if time had forgotten them. I walked through the empty streets, drawn toward a particular house at the end of the block. It stood out from the others, darker, colder, as if it had a life of its own. I approached it slowly, a sense of dread creeping over me. The front door creaked open on its own, inviting me in. I hesitated, but curiosity won out. As soon as I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the darkness. The air was thick, suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I moved through the house, room by room, but each one seemed to lead to another, deeper and more twisted. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I heard whispers, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. The whispers seemed to be coming from the walls, the furniture, the very air around me. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway, a tall, shadowy figure, its face hidden in the darkness. I tried to move, to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure began to move toward me, its footsteps slow and deliberate. I could feel its presence, its eyes watching me, but I couldn't bring myself to look. Just as it reached out for me, I woke up with a start. My heart was racing, my body covered in a cold sweat. I thought I had escaped, but every time I close my eyes, I see that house, that figure. And sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I swear I can still hear the whispers. I never imagined something like that could exist in my dreams. It was a typical night, or at least that's what I thought when I fell asleep. I found myself walking down a narrow alley, surrounded by tall, oppressive buildings that blocked out the sky. The street was eerily silent, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me, like it was watching, waiting. I couldn't remember how I got there or where I was going, but the alley seemed endless. As I moved deeper into it, I noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly like they were alive. The air grew colder, heavier, and I felt a sense of foreboding growing stronger with every step I took. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate, getting closer with each passing second. I spun around, but there was no one there. I kept walking, my heart pounding, when I saw a figure standing at the far end of the alley. It was tall, hunched, its body cloaked in tattered rags. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, rooted to the spot. The figure began to move toward me, its footsteps dragging, almost inhuman. As it drew closer, the air around me grew colder, and the whispers started, low, guttural, unintelligible words that seemed to come from all around me. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and twisted, and I felt a coldness I had never known before. It touched my skin, and in that instant I could feel its presence in my soul, its intent, its malice. I woke up gasping for air, my body covered in a cold sweat. The feeling of its touch lingered, and even now when I close my eyes, I still see that figure waiting for me in the dark. I still can't escape the feeling it was real. It began with a phone call. The sound of it ringing echoed through my house, sharp and unsettling, but when I picked up, there was nothing on the other end. I didn't think much of it at first, just a wrong number or a glitch, but the moment I hung up, the air in the room changed. It felt colder, thicker, as if something was pressing in from all sides. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, I answered it immediately, expecting silence once more, but there was a voice I didn't recognize, but somehow I knew it. It was low, distorted, like it was coming through a cracked speaker. The words were simple: "Come outside." I didn't know why, but I found myself walking toward the door. As I opened it, the night air hit me with a rush of cold. The street was empty, still, no cars, no people. Just shadows stretching too far under the dim street lights. I stood there, frozen, as the voice whispered again, "Come closer." Something compelled me to step outside, my legs moving on their own, despite the fear gnawing at me. I walked toward the end of the driveway where the shadows seemed darker, more unnatural. The voice kept calling me closer, closer, until I was standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by the thick silence. And then I saw it. A figure, barely visible in the darkness, standing at the far end of the street. Its shape was distorted, shifting like it was made of smoke. It didn't move, just stood there watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't just watching, it was waiting. Before I could react, the figure took a step forward, and the world around me seemed to bend and twist. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The phone rang again in my pocket, and I knew somehow that it wasn't going to stop until I answered it. I woke up with the sound of the phone ringing in my ears, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. But even now, when the phone rings late at night, I can't shake the feeling that the voice is still out there, waiting for me to come outside again. I knew I was dreaming, but I couldn't wake up. It all started with a dark corridor. The kind of corridor that seems to stretch forever, the end always just out of reach. I walked down it, every step echoing in the silence, the only light coming from flickering, overhead bulbs that did nothing to pierce the suffocating darkness. Felt wrong, but I couldn't explain why. Something was off, but I had no choice but to keep walking. At the end of the hallway I saw a door. It was old, wooden, its paint chipped and peeling. My instincts screamed at me not to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached out and twisted the handle. As I stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind me and I was plunged into darkness. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The air around me thickened, heavy with a presence that I couldn't see but could feel closing in on me. I tried to call out, but no sound left my mouth. I tried to move, but my body felt frozen, as though something was holding me in place. My heart raced as I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, but oddly familiar. I turned, and standing there in the darkness was a figure, its face hidden, its body cloaked in shadows. The figure didn't speak, just stood there watching me. And in that moment, I knew that whatever it wasn't human. The room began to spin. The walls seemed to close in, the floor shifting beneath my feet. I tried to scream, to run, but I was trapped in that dark room, caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The figure took a step forward, and with every movement, the temperature dropped. I could feel the chill creeping into my bones, as if it was draining the warmth from my very soul. Just as it reached out for me, I woke up, sitting upright in bed, gasping for breath. But it didn't end there. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel that cold hand, waiting to pull me back into the darkness. If these stories left you uneasy, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more chilling tales. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Are you brave enough to hear more?